Hello and welcome to the romance track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Martin and Morgan Brice, and tonight we are talking about Fae and Shifter Romance, which is going to be a lot of fun. But before we get into that, let's have our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Leverett, or Emily Lavin Leverett. I am a writer, an editor, and an academic. I'm a medievalist English professor, and I write about shifters and fairies in both of my works, the Iceflood Chronicles about a modern woman who goes to fairy, and a historical paranormal romance about a witch and a werewolf based on the life and poetry of Marie de France.
Very cool. Seressia.
Hi, I'm Seressia Glass, and I write contemporary urban fantasy and paranormal romance. In paranormal romance, I've done Jackal Shifters and did a little bit of fairy, but not a lot, and hope to get back into that a little deeper.
Okay, Dahlia.
Hey, I'm Dahlia Rose. I'm a USA Today bestselling author. I'm represented by the Honey Magnolia Agency. I write anything, I'm multi-genre, so I write anything from contemporary to paranormal. And I have a few shifter series out there and a few fairies going on. And like Seressia, I'm trying to get back to my fairies.
Very good. And Cecilia and her cat shifter.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so glad he doesn't shape shift. We'd be in trouble. Yeah, this guy with opposable thumbs, no. Hi, I'm Cecilia Dominic. I am a clinical psychologist and behavioral sleep medicine specialist. So by day, I help people sleep without drugs. By night, I'm a USA Today best-selling author of urban fantasy and steampunk. And I had a fae that appeared without me planning for her to, kind of like they do in my lycanthropy files. And then she got her own series. So I'm really excited to be here.
Very good. And I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Brice. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I've had the Fae show up so far generally as antagonists or kind of morally neutral creatures, but you never know, never say never. But I do have a series of shifter novels under my Morgan Brice name, the Fox Hollow series, and I also have shifters who play recurring roles in several of the Gail and Larry books. So let's start with the Fae. There's a whole lot of lore around that. How do you decide what pieces of those legends and lore to pay attention to when you're crafting your fairies? Emily?
Well, our story, the Iceflood Chronicles series, started based on stuff that Sarah Adams, who I write with, and I were studying in graduate school. We were both working on our PhDs, and that's a horrible, horrible experience to go through. And so we, under that duress, decided that writing a novel probably would be easy. And so we tried it, and it was not easy. But we based it around the idea of what would happen if someone who was a medievalist who knew all this fairy stuff encountered fairies, and so had the response of, no, I'll just, spray you in the face with peppermint the way you do a cat with water so it doesn't climb on the drapes, because that's one of the things that would work in the Middle Ages with fairies. I mean, in the Middle Ages, if you wanted to see fairies, you ate mushrooms, much like today, I guess. So that was where we started, and sort of we went from there to sort of build a Fae culture. And we just take what we wanted. Our fairies are elemental. There's earth, wind, fire, and water fairies. There's a summer and winter court, those sort of elements.
Okay. Seressia.
For me, yeah, I just take the bits that seem interesting to me or that I want to explore further. So it's not, as a matter of fact, the story that I'm working on deals with Fae, mainly nature Fae. So, garden sprites and flower sprites and things like that, and smaller fairies. So, I've done a lot of research, trying to figure out how to shape the fairies that are in my story. And again, like Emily said, I'm just kind of picking and choosing some of the lore and then just kind of expanding on it or putting my spin on it. So not strictly following. And then of course, there's so many different ways. There's of even spelling fairy. So I figured that there's a lot of different ways to deal with fairies, and I can kind of insert my own.
Okay, Dahlia?
For me, I love lore. So, and I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from Barbados. So I do love Scotland. And so, and Scotland and Barbados have like a really rich, diverse culture that meshes together. And I found that out in writing historical romance, which is another genre that I write. But then I was like, huh, we can do this with historicals, I wonder if I can do this with paranormal. I started researching Fae lore from the Caribbean and Scotland, and then putting my own twist on it. And then it went further than that to be able to write Fae and go with other lore like Norway, or go to other places where they have more of the Fae lore, and then trying to twist that and give it kind of like a diverse Caribbean feel to it. And also I tend to set them out of places like everyone expects, Fae, Scotland. I tend to set them on a beach where they don't have a clue what's going on, like what sand, why is it so hot? Why is it not Scotland and green? Play things like that. So I try to play with it to make it entertaining and fun. And it's kind of like fish out of water in many areas.
Okay, Cecilia?
I got interested in the Fae because they have a different morality than humans do. And as a psychologist, I found that to be a lot of fun to play with and think about, okay, what do they value? And the more I dug into it, the more I found that it's not really all that different. Like they value perfection, they value beauty. And so I used those things as well as, yes, other things that you find in the legend. My fairies are pretty much Celtic based and UK based. And there's actually a society of people who collect fairy information. I found one of their books and spent a beach vacation reading all about the fairy encounters that they had. And so I'm pretty much, I will grab anything, any research from anywhere as long as it fits my story. But yeah, my system is that my high fae have all elements and they can change matter from one type of element to another, which is their big secret. Because if the humans found out, they'd be in big trouble. They'd be a lot more motivated to try to capture them and make them work for them. And so, yeah, they have high and low. I don't do summer and winter. I do light and dark fae, but I also try to make a big point that dark doesn't mean bad. I mean, you can't trust any of them.
Yeah. That's one of the things I think is so interesting with the Fae is that they aren't necessarily malicious, but that doesn't mean they won't harm you. It doesn't really matter what the intent is if you're dead. So sorry, oops, you broke easy. They really see things in a very different way than mortals do, and don't tremendously value mortals for the most part. I probably pulled more from Celtic mythology as well, but if there is some cool aspect that I find about the Fae from somewhere else, I'm very likely to figure out how to put a different spin on it and kind of borrow it and weave it in. But I like them because they are so unpredictable and kind of amoral. They might be helping you today, but that doesn't mean you should think that they are really an ally. They're just helping you today because it suits their purpose. And that makes them, and they're crazy powerful. So that makes them very interesting to kind of throw into an already complicated situation and, hope for the best. It's sort of like lighting a stick of dynamite and pitching it and hoping it lands in the right place. Now, are your Fae main characters? Are they important secondary characters? Are they protagonists or antagonists? How do you use them in your stories? Emily?
In my Icefog Chronicles, they're main characters. Our main character is a changeling who goes to fairy with the express purpose of finding her father so she can go home and not worry about it ever again. And that's not how it works. But the other main character is who is a general in the army and part of the civil patrol, because they don't really have a civilian force. It's sort of all the same. And he encounters her because she looks like a criminal, not on purpose, but she does. And so, yeah, they're main characters. There's secondary characters in my paranormal romance. Because I base it on Marie de France's poetry, and there's one of her poems is a poem called L'Envol about a man who gets the queen of the fairies essentially to fall in love with him and help him because he's such an amazing person. Without him ever knowing it, she just shows up and is like, hey, I'll help you. And so that happens to my main character, Marie, and she is it's sort of retelling the story with the knight character as a woman. So she shows up, and so she's a secondary character that gets a little bit in the way of the romance between the two main characters, because sometimes fairies will do that. And I was thinking about what Seressia said. I actually spell fairy differently in the two books. And so, yeah, it's so much fun to be like, no, my fairies are spelled this way.
Seressia?
Myself, there we go. So my fairies are kind of like they're coexisting with my main character. So they're kind of secondary because they work in the garden, and she kind of provides for them by giving them what they need, like beer or honey, anything that they need to kind of keep them happy and keep them working. So I'm using kind of some of that folklore about what they like the humans to gift them with or set out for them. So yeah, they're kind of like, I don't want to say like Cinderella and her mice, but they're kind of like that. They're gonna help her get the hero, basically, who does not, of course, believe in them until he has no choice but to believe in them.
All right. Dahlia.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear it. For me is I have a book that's hopefully out in July before I go to Rare London, and it's called Relay and the Fae Prince. And the premise of it is that he is just wandering, he's exploring and everything, and he finds a woman that looks exactly as like the woman that he lost long ago, and he decides to kidnap her. Granted, he kidnaps her from the Caribbean, using ley lines, but it tends to run amok from there. And then Relay learns that you really don't make deals with fairies, because there is always an add-on, an amendment to it. So she's learning really quickly that she's trying to get home and she's making deals with the wrong fairies. And we also always have the antagonist. And it just basically leads up to actually she is, part of the bloodline of the, fairy that he lost. So it kind of takes this twist in this, kind of like a rom-com field in some places, where she ends up, dancing in a tree with a fairy, and she can't get out because he's basically, she made a deal with him and she didn't really understand. And now she's kind of like stuck there with him for all eternity. But, there's ways to get out of deals with fairies. So she has to learn that world really, really quickly.
Okay. Cecilia.
I've used them as both. So as I mentioned in the Lycanthropy Files, Reign of the Fae appeared in Blood Shadow as an ally, but an ally with definitely her own motivations and reasons for helping. And I had also used the Fae in my Dreamweavers and Truth Seekers series as the antagonist, especially in the second book, Web of Truth, which was a 2019 Daphne du Maurier finalist. It stars Morgan Le Fay, and she is trying to finish out her conditions of a Fae bargain. And I decided that Reign of the Fae from Blood Shadow is like, well, okay, she's interesting. She gets a spin-off novel, and she's like, no, I get a trilogy. I'm like, okay, fine, you get a trilogy. So we get to the end of the trilogy. She's like, no, I get 3 more books. And I'm like, okay, fine, you get 3 more books. So I have just finished that series, actually. The last one came out in March. It is a 6-book series. And the tagline for the first one is that, yes, sometimes the Fae princess has to agree to an impossible bargain. Too bad there's no fair in Fae. So again, playing with that spelling. And she basically she's been exiled from fairies. She has to solve a mystery in order to be able to let back in. But it ended up being way more complicated than either she or I anticipated.
Okay. Yeah, so far mine have not been the main characters, but they played an important secondary role. In one case, when my main characters were visiting a castle on the border of the Welsh Marches, they end up finding out that there is well, in North Carolina, their family has a longstanding contract with the Fae for that they are the monster hunters of Cunanun Mountain in Western North Carolina, and they have a kind of a non-interference pact with the Fae, and somebody is trying to mess that up. And so they've gone on vacation. They find out that location really doesn't matter to the Fae. And there is somebody who comes through, a dark Fae who comes through a rift and has intent to cause trouble. And on a lighter note, there is also a small household Fae it's pronounced Bubok, but in Welsh, there are no vowels. So it's got W's and B's in strange places and doesn't look at all like Bubok, but it's basically a house elf. And they've run into dark Fae even in North Carolina. In the story that I'm just now doing for a Midsummer collection, there is also a Fae connection, but they're again an important secondary character. You run into the Green Man and Hearn, the huntsman, and a Draugr, but certainly not the love interest. So I have not worked up yet to having a love interest as a Fae, but like I said, never say never. So quick asking here, are your fairies AI or AE? Emily?
Are they what now?
How do you spell it? F-A-I-R-Y?
Oh, F-A-E-R-I-E for the Icefog Chronicles and F-A-I-R-Y for the Wolf and the Nun series.
Okay, Seressia?
I'm going to have to remember because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to switch it up in the novella that I'm writing right now. Since it's set in England, I'm going to go with the AE spelling, even though in my brain it's AI.
Dahlia?
Definitely AE for me.
Okay, Cecilia? Yes, definitely AE. And so they are the Fae and they live in Fairy, F-A-E-R-I-E. So that is their land or their dimension.
Yep, I go with AE as well. It just looks fair. What can I say? It's kind of like putting an E in gray. It's grayer that way. So before we move on to shifters, what books that feature Fae characters are some of your favorites or were favorites or influential for you? Emily Leverett?
Obviously, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Puck is a character in our series, and he's what I think he is in the play, which is a psychopath. I was like, Puck's so cute. No, he's not. He hurts people and breaks things for fun and is scary. And so that's one of my favorite sort of renditions. And I do love the Marie de France stories too, about different kinds of fairy and knights and stuff like that. Those are sort of where I get a lot of my inspiration.
Okay. Seressia?
I was sitting here trying to remember the series and who it was written by. Was it Laurel K. Hamilton? Was that the one? Okay, I can't remember what the name of it was until it went off the rails. But yeah, that one was the one that I had the deepest reading into and really found it interesting and fascinating how fairies in modern times were, out but not out kind of thing. So that was interesting. That's the one I liked.
Okay, Dahlia.
For me, it would be Patricia Briggs, the Mercy Thomas series, because her Fae are complicated as hell. One minute they're there to help, the next minute they're not, and they're more darker than you would expect. And I know everyone expects, oh, fairies fly around and gossamer wings and stuff, but these guys are crazy dark when they need to be, especially when they're going up against vampires and shifters.
Okay, Cecilia.
I mean, say either somebody has a very unhappy dog shifter nearby, or somebody's hungry. I don't think it's coming from here. So for nonfiction, there's a book called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries that was written a long, long time ago. Emily could probably tell us when. I want to say like 17 or 1800s, about a researcher who went around and gathered folklore. And then as for fiction, the Jim Butcher Dresden Files, his fairies are fun.
Yeah, Jim Butcher's fairies are a lot of fun. John Hartness's fairies are intriguing in the Bubbaverse. I thought that Charlene Harris's fairies in the Sookie Stackhouse books took an interesting turn with things. And for just plain fun, E.J. Russell's fairies in the Cutie and the Beast series are just adorable. So, you know, it goes from being pretty serious and deadly, like in the Harry Dresden books, to being kind of light and funny and rom-com with EJ's books. Now on to shifters. What shifter characters do you have, and what is it that appealed to you about writing shifters? Emily?
Their shifters are fun because then you get to write animals too, and animals are just interesting to write. In our Ice Fod books, we have a whole Irish pack of werewolves that look a bit like Irish setters, and sort of function either as really sort of adorable, goofy dogs or really scary, depending on what they need to be. And later in our series, our heroine Dior comes from America. And so she realizes once she goes back that she'd encountered shifters before, but not known what they were when she was a kid. But in America, they look very different. There are werebear shifters, there are coyotes, there are mountain lions, and like jaguars from South America that have come up, because America's weird because it's an immigrant land. So there are like were bison, and there are probably some eagles somewhere. There's an alligator whose family immigrated from Pakistan years ago. So there's all sorts of different kinds that show up, and those are fun. I play with a werewolf myth in my paranormal romance. One of the main character, Marie, and the other main character, Blaze, he is a werewolf, but in Marie's story, and what I use is that he doesn't turn into a wolf once a month. It's not a lunar cycle. It happens 3 days a week. And so that really can impact your social life and schedule and so in writing it, it's a little harder because there's a lot more counting, right? You know, shit, he's a dog, shit. And so the futz with stuff like that. And he'd use it as a curse from God. Whether it is or not is up for debate.
Okay, Seressia.
The shifters that I write are jackal shifters. They're called the Sons of Anubis. So basically, they serve Anubis and basically track down those spirits that don't want to go on to their final destination and decide they want to stay on Earth for a while. So, and of course, I located them in Atlanta because, of course, Egyptian shifters would be in Atlanta. Why wouldn't they? So, but yeah, so there's a lot of Egyptian mythology in it, and they shift at will. So it's not based on any kind of lunar cycle. They just shift when they need to, and especially when they have to protect or defend. So.
Okay, Dahlia. No, we can't hear you.
Okay, shifters are my favorite. So I started writing shifters with my Army Bee series, and I really implemented that they don't have a lunar cycle, they shift at will. And I made them part of a specialized Army unit because, you know, military wife, of course I was going to do that. And I made them, you know, I gave them various animal abilities. Like I had panthers, and I had a white tiger and a few others in this series. And I remember I killed off one of them, and my readers revolted against me for years until I brought him back. I literally had to name it The Resurrection of Stavros to bring him back, because they would not let me go for years. They talked about it endlessly. And I also have a series that is Dragon Shifters, and I set that more along Norse Viking folklore. And there's a portal that can go between their world and our world, and they protect mankind from another type of dragon shifter that's basically going to try to enslave mankind. I've played with shifters for years, and I've absolutely loved them. Last year when I was in Scotland, we went up to the Highlands and into Fife, and places like that, and I was like, oh, this is where I can set so many shifter movies, so many shifter books. So I collected everything I could on Scottish lore, and I actually found a few books about shifters in Scotland as well. So I was really intrigued by that.
Okay. Cecilia. No, you're muted.
Whoops. I got into shifters when I was on internship in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was at the Central Arkansas VA doing my pre-doctoral internship, and I had a rotation on the dialysis unit. And it was the flagship VA for the area, so veterans would come from all over, including down from the Ozark Mountains, and they would tell me stories after I screened them for depression about all of the weird stuff that they had seen up in the mountains. And so I had been to the Ozarks and thought, okay, so weird stuff happens up there. What would be a good shifter for it? And so that's when I settled on werewolves. But in my case, because I was coming from a medical setting at the time, my werewolves are, it's basically a genetic disorder rather than a magical issue. They do follow the lunar cycle. They have to shift on the full moon, but they can shift anytime they want outside of that as well. And through the lycanthropy files, it gets to be a big question as to, okay, if they find a cure for this medical disorder, who gets access to it? And so it was interesting to explore that as well. And then I got into the Fae files, broadened my world a little bit. There's a mountain lion shifter, and then the love interest is a gargoyle, who is also a shifter. And I wanted something that would be an elemental, so it would be complementary to my Fae. And so gargoyles are earth, water, and air.
Okay. I've had werewolves show up sporadically, usually so far as bad guys, as truly a monster to be fought. But shifters show up in a number of our books. We have recurring shifters in the Spell, Salt, and Steel series that I co-write with Larry Martin. And they are allies, and they're wolf shifters, but we also have some bobcat shifters because they're up in the Pennsylvania big woods, and that's a huge swath of forest across the top third of Pennsylvania, and it's very sparsely populated, and anything can be up there. I really don't doubt that there's stuff up there nobody's seen. Then in the Fox Hollow books, which are male romance that I write under my Morgan Brice name, Fox Hollow is a town in the Adirondacks that is a haven for misfit shifters and misfit psychics. So shifters that don't fit with their packs or whatever you call their aggregate community can find sanctuary in Fox Hollow. And so we have not just wolves and foxes, but fainting goats and squirrels and beavers and otters and bobcats and moose. And it's just a lot of fun because my shifters always retain the personality of their animal, even when they're in human form. So there's this constant bickering in their head between human them and animal them. And animal them always has a very different perspective on things. So they bicker like an old married couple in their own head. And then when they shift, it's the reverse. They don't lose their human sense as well. But that makes for a lot of fun banter just mentally for the characters. So what is it about shifters that fascinates us so much? Emily?
I mean, I think on an obvious level for at least certain kinds of shifters, they are unquestionably hot, right? Like they just are, because most of the animals are in decent physical shape. And so then you get the physical ability that sometimes transfers to them as humans. And so they are, I think, attractive, and it's easy to understand. And I mean, I think everybody, or at least most people as a child, has had a fantasy of what it would be like to be able to be an animal, right? And so you get to do those things that are fun to do. And the structures, even though like the alpha structure is not real, there's still something appealing about it, right? Like a sort of familial based structure that they don't have to even be all the same. Like there are a lot of shifter communities that are full of misfit shifters or whatever groups that make their own families. But I definitely think a large part of it is, at least if you're writing romance, that they're hot. That's really pretty simple.
Okay, Seressia.
I like kind of exploring that dichotomy between human nature and animal nature, and the bands of loyalty that can be in that based on either their human nature or their animal nature. So, and sometimes, you know, like you said, when they're hot, and then when they get that animal urge, you know, to find their mate and kidnap their mate, like, you know, somebody did in my first book, Seducing the Jackal. I just really like exploring how they handle their human side and their animal side, all with a romantic twist, of course.
Okay, Dahlia.
For me, I think I like the element of trying to balance human and predator, because we've also got to understand that while they are shifters and they are, you know, inherently human, there are predators. So I like to, you know, bring out that animalistic part and try to blend it, you know, with the human aspect and try to make them a little bit more complicated. And my shifters tend to be more, the human side is more intelligent. I mean, the wolf side is intelligent, but they don't use a lot of physical words. Like if they find a mate, the wolf will be like, she's mine, and that's it. And, you know, they don't elaborate a lot. They're more like caveman, club her over the head and take her to your cave thing. And like Emily said, they're just inherently hot. And an example is Lost Girl. Dyson, that wolf, when he changed and when he came back, and he was, you know, he just had that animalistic look and gait of that left from shifter to human, and it just stuck. And I was like, well, look what we have here. So it's like really the balance of the two is really, really interesting.
Okay, Cecilia.
I like playing with the brain structures and thinking, okay, what part of the brain and what neurotransmitters are actually involved in the change? Because in one of my books, I had to find out a way to block it. And so it was, you know, what exactly is happening during the change, not just physically, but neurologically. And also the smoothness of the transition, because we are all chameleons in a certain sense. We have to shift identities from one place to another. Like this past weekend, I was at JordanCon. Monday morning, I had to go lecture to the Emory Sleep Fellows. And it was like, okay, don't introduce yourself as Cecilia. Don't introduce yourself as Cecilia, even though I'd been doing that all weekend. So it's the, you know, who am I here? Who am I here? And it's also that, you know, being animals, they are not necessarily going to be happy about some of the solutions that their human sides come up for them. So I have a group of shifters in the second book in the Lycanthropy Files, Long Shadows, and they have like a group shift and hunt. But, you know, when they shift, they don't have opposable thumbs. So how are we going to get out the door? And so they're like, a doggy door? Really? A doggy door? This is embarrassing. But they used the doggy door. And yeah, it's that was a lot of fun. But, and it's also thinking about, okay, not just the society and the hierarchy, but what happens developmentally. So in the Lycanthropy Files, it was, okay, so the shifters who are born to shifter families, they get guidance throughout their lives at managing their shifts and not, you know, giving themselves a couple of moments after shifting from animal to human so they don't react as animals with human capabilities. But the ones who are spontaneously, shall we say, developing chronic lycanthropy syndrome don't have that, which is causing some problems.
Okay. I love to play with the overlap of characteristics between the animal side and the human side. So, you know, my squirrel shifter is this rather petite guy who always sounds like he's just slams 3 Red Bulls. He's just twitchy. And my fox shifter, Liam, he's inordinately proud of his tail when he's a fox, and he's just fabulous. And he is definitely, he is a big fan of kohl eyeliner because it just looks good on him. And so it's just, it's fun to play with some of those animal traits. My fainting goat has a lot of anxiety as a human and tends to get very anxious and have panic attacks and pass out. So it's just kind of fun to play with some of those aspects, not just the sexy, wolf stalking through the forest, but the poor little fainting goat who's just, fallen over and is royally embarrassed. So I think that's one of the things that I have a lot of fun with, is just, trading those pieces off and seeing how they show up in both the animal and the human side. So what are some of your favorite shifter series? Emily?
I like some of the older school ones. And I guess this isn't that old school, but What We Do in the Shadows, I know it follows vampires, but we're werewolves, not swearwolves. Like, just the sort of mundane and adorable nature of them really, I really enjoyed that. And I've read a couple shifter romances and werewolf romances that are a lot of fun. And I just can't remember names, because after you started to read a few of them, sorting them out is a little harder to do. But yeah, those are the sort of, like you're talking about, the way that you write them, some of the comic moments I find super entertaining to read.
Okay, Seressia.
I really found the structure of the shifters in the Ilona Andrews series to be, that was really, I just liked her, the way that she handled them, clan heavy, clan nimble, all of that kind of stuff. It's just, and how the shifters of different types kind of organize themselves. And the other one was, of course, somebody mentioned the Mercy series. Adam and his shifters. I just liked him because he was just cool. And then, he was dealing with his daughter, but he was also the alpha of this pack, and just how he was. And then, of course, he loved Mercy, but enough to let her have her own life. Just all of that was just very interesting. I just really enjoyed both of those series.
Okay, Dahlia. You're muted.
Again, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I like to spin off from the Mercy series with the Alpha and Omega and that whole clan and how they built that and the hierarchy that goes on there. I also like the Wolves in Sookie Stackhouse because 1 minute they're great and next minute they're crackheads. And I'm like, okay, it showed like they all are not always going to be, these perfect shifting things. Some of them are just feral and want babies. And I did love that Mercy Thomas with the shifters. The really sweet part is that Adam allowed a coyote there and they accepted her. And, Mercy nestled with, a bunch of wolves, and she's just a wily coyote. And she found out that they actually see her as one of them, and she's so versatile and nimble. And it's just really great how Patricia Brigg wrote that entire series.
Okay, Cecilia.
You're catching me trying to look up the one of the ones that I was thinking about, which I don't know if I'll be able to. But so definitely the Mercy Thompson series. I've only read the first one, but I'm definitely going to go back and pick that up again. I also ended up reading a series last year by Elizabeth Briggs. I don't know if they're related or not, called The Zodiac Wolves, which was definitely a werewolf paranormal romance. And I usually don't have a lot of patience for alpha heroes. I find them to be alpha holes, and I like my alphas tempered. But this one I actually can deal with. And then going back, yes, Robert McCammon, The Wolf's Hour, a werewolf novel set in World War II, and basically the werewolf is a spy, and it's really super interesting. So yeah, I would say those are my top three currently.
Well, everybody's mentioned many of the ones like Mercy Thompson and Sookie Stackhouse, but I want to give a shout out to Charlie Cochet's third series, which is a male paranormal romance series with a paramilitary group that each partner, one partner is human, one partner is a cat shifter, a big cat shifter. And of course, the partners all end up falling in love with each other. But it's just a well-written series and a lot of fun. And there's a lot of humor as well as a lot of action. And Elsie Davis's Mountain Shifter series is also, I think, really good in terms of having world building for their shifters. Well, folks, we have gone through our time. So let's go around and tell everybody where people can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, let us know. Emily?
You can find me at emilylavinleverett.com. My name is uncommon, so it is super easy to find me. There you'll find links to both my series, which are available on Amazon, and also the Iceflood Chronicles are available in audiobook. So if you prefer your books that way, you can find them there. The fourth book in the Iceflood Chronicles Summer Regent should be out later this year. And the fourth and final book in my Wolf and the Nun series, An Honorable Love, should also be out this summer. So that'll wrap up that arc of that book. So both of those are coming soon.
Very good. Seressia?
Basically, if you can spell my name, you can find me in probably the street in Belgium that is also Rue de Seressia or something like that. But yeah, you can find me on all of the social media channels except for TikTok because I'm too old for that. And of course, you know, what's coming up next is I have a story in A Midsummer at Kingdom Castle that deals with fairies. Then I'm expanding a novel that's kind of set in the Shadow Chaser, a paranormal novella that was set in the Shadow Chasers universe that'll be coming out through the summer. And then I have a rom-com coming out in December that deals with gamers.
Ooh, fun. Dahlia?
You can find me at dahliaroseunscripted.com or on any of the social media, including TikTok, because I go up there and do random things for no reason to annoy my kids. I have Relay and the Fae Prince coming out hopefully by summer, and then my shifter, the Wolf, will also be out hopefully by the end of June, fingers crossed. Or I think May is the pre-order. Yeah, that's supposed to be out in May. I lose myself. And you can find me anywhere on social media, and I'm pretty much easy to talk to. Just DM me or send me a message, and then I'll, have a chat.
Okay. Cecilia?
You can find me at CeciliaDominic.com and also at Cecilia Dominic Author on Instagram and Facebook. I am pretty much not on Twitter anymore. And like Seressia, I just not into the whole TikTok thing. Also, my books are available everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all over the place. And I also have a bookshop.org store if you want to get them in paper and support your local bookstore. So that's ABCD Books on bookshop.org. And if you are interested in psychological and sleep tidbits, you can find me on Instagram at Psych Up Academy.
Okay. I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbrice.com. If you spell them right, you'll find me on all the social media. I'm mostly on Facebook, but I'm also pretty active on TikTok and Pinterest and Instagram, a little bit on Twitter, and a good bit more than I ever expected on YouTube. So I'm out there, pretty easy to find. And most of the time, however, you can find me here on Continual. As far as books go, the new one is Peacemaker, which is kind of like Wild Wild West if Jim and Artie were together. I'm also in the Midsummer Kingdom Castle collection, so that will be a fairy story. And the next one I'm working on right now is Point Blank, which is the next book in the Badlands series under the Morgan Brice name. And we just had Forged come out as part of the Joe Mack adventure. So lots of new stuff going on. But as I said, most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more romance coming up on Continual. So we'll see you online.